job this morning. Would have never known that you just put it together, Greg. So excellent job. We do appreciate it. Knock my microphone. All right. So we've been going through just some thoughts through the life of Jesus for the past couple of weeks, and of course that continues today as we prepare for Easter. There's actually a really interesting event in Jesus' life in Luke chapter 9. I want to focus our attention on. This is before Palm Sunday, a significant amount of time before Palm Sunday, but I think it's important. Palm Sunday is a very interesting Sunday because people reveal their very fickle nature at this season in Jesus' life. They celebrate his coming into the city, and a week later they say, crucify him. They are just so wishy-washy. And Jesus tried to avoid that by giving people the seriousness of what it meant to follow him. And that's what we're going to study in Luke chapter 9 today. Begin by telling you about the chicken and the pig that were coming out of church one Sunday, and they're having a conversation, as chicken and pigs tend to do. And the chicken said, did you see that next week they're having that breakfast where they're going to raise money for missionaries? And the pig said, I did see that. The chicken said, I think we ought to make some donations to help out. And the pig said, I think that's a great idea. What were you thinking? The chicken said, I think we should donate eggs and bacon. The pig said, now wait just a minute there. What you are doing is making a donation. What you're asking me to do is make a total commitment. And when we talk about following Jesus, I think that's exactly the kind of two camps that we can put ourselves in. We can be in the donate camp or the total commitment camp. It reminds me that one of my favorite old cartoons is this one here where two guys are coming out of church and they're standing there in their boxer shorts, and the one says to the other, that was the best sermon on giving I ever heard. You know, and that's how some people are. Sometimes they give all of themselves to a task, they're totally committed. Other times, it's just a simple matter of a donation. Jesus wasn't really interested in donations, though, when you read through his life, when you study what he was all about. He was interested in total commitment. And so we're going to examine what that exactly looks like in our lives today. If you were to pick one Bible verse that is most commonly used on bumper stickers and t-shirts and billboards, what verse would you pick? John 3:16. I heard at least 3 different people say it. For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son. Whoever believes in him shall not perish but have eternal life. Of course, that's the classic one. Do you know why this verse is the most commonly picked? I'm not trying to be cynical, but here's what I think it is this verse appears to have the least amount of commitment attached to it. All you got to do is believe, and that's it. It's over. It's done. But we're missing context, because when you read what happens in this exchange between Jesus and Nicodemus, there's a lot more involved than belief is not just mental assent. We read what we want to in the Word. Believe is just what you agree with mentally. No, belief entails actions and a lifestyle of commitment involved with it. But that's why we like John 3:16. It appears to have the least amount of commitment attached to following Jesus. You know, this became the most searched verse many years ago when Tim Tebow was the quarterback of Florida when he was in the national championship game. That was under his eye black, John 3:16, most Googled phrase during the game as people wanted to know what it said. And to be fair, it's a great one. This is exactly the type of verse you would use to attract people to Jesus. The one verse you would never choose is Luke 9:23. Nobody goes to Luke 9:23 as a starting point. But yet, that's exactly the starting point Jesus used with so many. What does Luke 9:23? It says, if anyone wants to come after me, he must deny himself, pick up his cross daily, and follow me. That's a serious amount of commitment attached to following Jesus. And so what we're going to do is we're going to break down this verse into 3 very simple parts for us today and to see how it applies. The first is this very beginning phrase, if anyone. If anyone. We are to accept the call of Jesus. Now here's the really neat thing. Anyone means everyone is possibly able to follow Jesus. That's the cool thing. Everyone is a candidate to follow Jesus. The Bible says all are called, few are chosen. I think another way we could render that phrase is all are called, few will accept the call. Jesus calls everyone to follow him. In fact, we read in, Paul writes in Timothy that God desires all people to be saved. But we also know that not all people want to be saved. Not all people want to follow Jesus. But this really neat part of the phrase is, all are called. Billy Graham was once attributed with the quote that salvation is free, but discipleship will cost you everything. It's free to accept the gift of salvation of Jesus' sacrifice for your sins, but to accept it and to live a life for Jesus will cost you absolutely everything about your life. And so that's the really neat thing about this verse. So I bet have you ever had a conversation with someone and you invited them to church and they said, oh, if I walked in there, the place would burn down. I've actually literally had that conversation with somebody. I'm like, oh, you must be mistaken, because church isn't for perfect people. If you're perfect, you don't need to show up. Church is for broken people. And so if anyone would come after Jesus, that includes the addicted. That includes the abusers. That includes those who've been liars and cheats. That includes those who've been addicted to pornography. That includes those who have taken advantage of others. It doesn't matter what your background is. If anyone should desire to come after Jesus, you're a candidate to accept the call. That's the neat universal claim of God's love. That's also the neat thing of John 3:16. For God so loved the world that whosoever is, if anyone. The call of Jesus is universal for absolutely everyone. But then we get to the next part of the verse, and we're going to get there in just a minute. But before we do, I want to fast forward through Luke chapter 9 to over halfway down through it, where this interesting encounter takes place between Jesus and three people who say they want to follow him. Here's what's really interesting about it. If someone came to church today, and afterwards they tell me, Mark, I want to join the church and I want to start contributing, I'd be like, oh, absolutely. And well, I can't make a commitment to be here every week, but we're gonna start giving some offering. I want to teach a class once a month. No problem. We will make this work. I am so glad you are here. I don't want to act like I'm desperate or anything, but I am just excited when anybody decides they want to contribute to the church in some kind of way. And it's interesting that Jesus has three people come up to him and say, we want to contribute to your kingdom work. And Jesus up front kind of tells them, are you sure about that? Are you sure you really want to do that? Could you imagine someone come up to me today, Mark, I'd like to join the church. Oh, you think you do? Well, let me tell you what you're going to have to do. You got to do 50 push-ups, and you got to run around the church, and you know what? Never mind. I'm sure there's another church down the road that will make it a lot easier. Jesus wasn't interested in making it easier. He was interested in being honest about what it meant to follow him. And so he put it out there. The first guy comes up to Jesus. He said, Jesus, I'll follow you wherever you go. Ooh, that's a nice blanket statement. I like it. If I'm Jesus, I say, follow along. But Jesus says a very interesting statement. He says, foxes have dens, birds have nests, but the Son of Man has no place to lay his head. Now that's a really weird thing to say. Jesus is saying, if you follow me, you might very well be homeless. Now we have to read into the text a little bit if we're going to understand the context of why Jesus would make such a claim. Why would Jesus tell him you might be homeless? He just said he'll follow you wherever you go. Here's my guess. At this point in Jesus' ministry, thousands of people are flocking to him. Some are being healed. They're hearing lessons taught that they've never heard before. There's a lot of excitement around Jesus. Maybe this guy had an ulterior motive. Maybe he thought, if I travel with Jesus, when we go into town, the ruler of the town, the governor, the mayor, he's going to want us to stay at his house. They're going to feed us they're going to feed us the best food. They're going to put us in the nicest accommodations, 5-star hotels. This is going to be awesome. I want to follow Jesus wherever he goes. I want to be part of that entourage. And Jesus says, my entourage were homeless. Here's the other interesting thing in this passage. We don't know what the three guys said. Whenever Jesus tells them, here's the cost, we don't know that they follow him. In fact, I would assume they don't, because if they did follow him, I think you'd want to include that in the text. That would be a good thing to follow up on. And they followed him anyway. Okay, there's a good example for us. My guess is that's probably not the case. All right, so the second guy comes up to Jesus, and he wants to follow Jesus. He says, but let me first go bury my dad. Very reasonable request, you would assume, on the surface. But what does Jesus say? He says one of the harshest statements in the New Testament. Let the dead bury the dead. Now, what is he talking about? If you've ever had to bury a parent, as this man is saying to do in this text, I can't imagine Jesus coming up to you and saying, you know what, skip the funeral, let's get to work. That doesn't sound like Jesus. Jesus attended funerals. He normally turned them into family reunions because he rose them up from the dead. But still, that seems like a really harsh, un-Jesus-like thing to say, doesn't it? What's going on? Well, again, there's maybe some nuance to the text that we're just not being translated clearly. There are some commentaries, not all, but some suggest that the man's dad was not dead. In fact, he was probably maybe in a hospice care situation or a long-term care situation where he was in the latter years of life, but he could be living for possibly months or a couple more years before he passed away. So when he told Jesus, let me bury my father first, he might be saying, look, I've got some time I need to spend with the family before I move on. Now think about it. How many times have you had the conversation in your life with you or your siblings, or conversations been had by your children saying, you know what, we don't all want to move away from mom and dad. Somebody needs to live close to us. They're going to be needing us at this stage in their life. Someone's going to need to be there to help out. We're so glad Annie lives 2 miles from mom and dad. That we are so glad for that. Keep up the good work. And but no, I mean, that's the conversation you always have, you know. Well, you don't want to all flock to the coast and then leave mom and dad in the heartland and then they need help. Who's going to be there to help out? These are normal conversations in families. And so it seems reasonable that this guy would say, let me be there for my dad. But maybe he has an ulterior motive as well. Maybe his ulterior motive is the inheritance. If he's there to help out with dad when he passes away, then he's going to get his share of the inheritance. If he's gone for the last 2 years of his life, well, you weren't here to help out, you don't get anything. Maybe. We don't know that. I'm not trying to read too much into the text, but that could be the suggestion. If we don't want to read that much into it, and if we want to pull back a little bit, let's say his dad is ill, but it could be months. Jesus is saying the kingdom work is too important. We have to get out there and share the good news. And sometimes that means making some really hard decisions about what you put first in your life. Third guy comes up to Jesus, and he says, I'm going to follow you, but I want to say goodbye to my family first. And Jesus says, no one who sets his hand to the plow and looks back is fit for the kingdom. Now that's another very interesting passage that takes place here. And the way we would assume this is there was a common thing when you would leave home that you would have this big celebration dinner that would take days and they would make a big fuss about it. And Jesus is saying, you can't serve two masters. You're going to leave home, but all you're going to think about is going back home. You either are going to pursue me or not. He's not very keen on the lukewarm idea. Read Revelation chapter 3 if you want an insight into that. Jesus wants you either following him or not. And so that leads us into the second part of Luke chapter 9 verse 23. Who wants to follow after me? We could phrase that passionately pursue. If you want to follow Jesus, you need to passionately pursue him. Think about a passion that you've had in your life, an interest, a hobby. When it starts to take hold of you, it consumes you. All you can think about, all your extra money and time and energy is poured into whatever it is that you're interested in at the moment. And Jesus wants to be that at the center of your life. He wants you to passionately pursue him. And to do that, you have to abandon everything else. The problem is we have watered down the call. We've made following Jesus as cost-free as possible. And I'm not saying we as a church, I'm just saying the church as a whole in our country. We have watered down the call of following Jesus. In fact, Jesus went so far as to say, if you want to follow me, then it's got to look like you hate your family. He doesn't tell you to hate your family. In fact, you can't follow Jesus if you hate your family. But he says, your love for me has to be so great, it looks like you don't have love for anyone else. That's a really harsh statement. And Jesus would say, you need to pick up your cross daily and follow him. I mean, that'd be like me saying, all right, pick up your electric chair, pick up your lethal injection and follow me. I mean, that's a really harsh statement. We've made the cross a thing of beauty. We have gold necklaces and little emblems, or we have a little thing on our dashboard in our car, or we have a nice little magnet on the fridge, and we're like, oh, yes, the cross. This was an instrument of torture and death. And if you're going to passionately pursue Jesus, you're going to have to overcome some extremely difficult obstacles. Jesus refused to water down the call to get 3 new followers. He said, if you're going to follow me, there's a cost attached with it. Yes, the salvation he provides is free. There's nothing you can do to earn it. But if you're going to passionately pursue Jesus, then you are going to have to make some difficult decisions. Here's the problem. Many churches today, when it comes time for the invitation, if they even offer an invitation, what happens? They say, all right, everybody bow your head. Don't. You need to see what's going on here. And they say, bow your head. And if today you are one who wants to accept salvation, you raise your hand. All right, very good. And those who have your raised hand, repeat this prayer after me. And now you're saved. Go home, have a great day. That's it. open your Bible. Where does it say to do that? I'm going to give you a hint. You're not going to find it. You can read the whole thing. It doesn't exist. That type of invitation, that type of acceptance of Jesus does not exist in the Bible. We are watering down the call, making it so easy that we're doing things that just don't exist in the Bible. Why? Part of it's our culture. We live in an instant gratification culture. How many of you have ever cooked long grain rice? You know what I'm talking about? You remember long grain rice? It takes like 45 minutes on low heat on the stove, and you got to stir it constantly or it sticks to the bottom of the pan. How many of you use minute rice? All right, so I'd say over half of us. All right, me too, absolutely. And you know, it's amazing. When we have taco night at our house, Max loves rice and beans in his taco. That's it. No meat, no nothing else. Just rice and beans. And every night we forget to make the rice. No joke. Every Tuesday night, it's taco night, we forget to have the rice. So as we're setting the table, we put the cup of water on to boil. It takes like 1 minute. Throw the rice in. By the time we finish setting the table and start making our tacos, it's done. It's ready to go. No problem. If we had to do long grain rice, Max, have it for breakfast. Okay? That's just your only choice. You're not going to have the rice tonight. But we love that instant gratification. We love drive-thrus. We love curbside pickup. You know, how fast can I get my stuff and get out? That is our culture. And so the churches that are watering down the call are saying, well, how quickly can we get people salvation to get them out the door and make them happy? Make instant gratification. Raise your hand, repeat this prayer after me, see you next week maybe, but if not, you're saved, it doesn't matter. I mean, that is not what following Jesus is all about. And I'm not saying we haven't watered it down at all. At times I think we've made it too easy. We made it too convenient. Following Jesus was never meant to be easy or convenient, but it is rewarding. It is valuable. It is something beyond compare if you will pour your life into it. If you will passionately pursue Jesus, it's a decision you will never regret. But we have to quit adopting our culture into the church. We have to start doing what Jesus has called us to do. You know, if I think of the disciples who followed Jesus, the 12 that followed him, think of what they gave up to follow Jesus. They gave up their profession. Some were fishermen, had a tax collector in there, and there were probably some other professions we don't know about. They gave up what they knew. And you may say, well, being a fisherman wasn't exactly the most prestigious job. It was kind of minimum wage. Well, maybe. But they knew what they were doing. They did provide for their families, yet they gave it up. We know Peter was married because he had a mother-in-law, and as Mike Disher likes to tell us, why would you have one of those if you weren't married? I like my mother-in-law, so that's not an issue, but I'm just putting that one out there. But no, I mean, that's exactly, that he was married. But we never read about his family. We never read about his wife. We never read about if he had kids. We don't know about that part of his life because, quite frankly, he probably spent a lot of time away from them to follow Jesus. We just don't know. But we know they made so many sacrifices. They sacrificed possessions. When you traveled with Jesus, what could you carry? They weren't carrying the collection of the latest, trinkets. They couldn't do it. They didn't take anything with them. And oftentimes Jesus would send them out. Don't take anything extra with you. Just go. They didn't have a chance to have possessions or nice things. They had no display cases. There was no place to display it if they did. They didn't have enough money to own anything, to display anything. Today we talk about self-love. And we talked about this last week, so I don't need to harp on it much. And self-care. And yes, there's importance to it. But the greatest self-care is self-sacrifice for Jesus. You'll never do more to help yourself than when you completely, passionately pursue Jesus for who he is and what he's done. Understand, following Jesus has a high cost attached to it. And that's what the last phrase is. Take up his cross daily. Whew. It's one thing to ask someone to make a big sacrifice in a moment. But this is a daily sacrifice that follows you through the end of your life. Now, Coach and I were talking about different workouts and different things. We talk about running all the time. And, when I have a race on the calendar, I can work out pretty good. I'll get out there, I'll do lots of burpees, I'll be running, I'll be lifting weights, I'll be doing whatever I can to get ready for that race. But as soon as that race is over, the motivation is gone. There's nothing on the calendar. There's nothing pushing me to continue to make that same decision. But I'm willing to sacrifice for 3 months, 6 months, 9 months. But what about every day for the rest of my life? Oof, that's pretty high cost. I don't know. And every now and then I want to just sit down and, eat a Snickers. That's just, that's life, right? Well, following Jesus is a daily choice to sacrifice of yourself. Really, the question comes down to this. Do you think it's worth it? Do you think following Jesus is truly worth the daily sacrifice of picking up your cross? And really, if you don't, I assume you're probably saying yes, but I hope you'll be a little bit more thoughtful about it and say, am I really? And if you really want to dive into it, there's two ways you can examine your life that I think will give you a good insight. You look at your bank account and you look at your time log. How do you spend your money and how do you spend your time? That tells you about what's important in your life. And you say, well, I know what I spend my money on. Yeah, open up your online banking and see where it goes. See where you're spending most of your money. How many times does Amazon pop up in there? And are you investing more in Amazon than Kingdom Work? I'm not judging you for it. I'm just asking you to evaluate your life. Are you spending more on fast food than you are on the body and blood of Christ? That's only a question you can answer for yourself and determine what level percentages matter. You need to examine your own life and determine what you're willing to do to follow Jesus. And then your time log. I tell you to keep a time log for a week and see where you spend your time. You got to do it honestly. And if anything is, people lie about their time more than anything else. And not necessarily intentionally, but they do. Think about it. If you work for 45 minutes on a project, do you tell someone you worked for 45 minutes? No. You say, I worked almost an hour on that thing, or about an hour on that thing. However, if you were given an hour lunch break and you took an hour 5, what do you say? Yeah, I was gone about an hour. We round down our leisure, we round up our work, and we just make it sound like it's worse than it actually is. Now, that's not true for everybody. Some are absolutely honest and specific with it, and they don't exaggerate, and that's fine. But if you have an honest assessment of your time and your money, you will see what's important in your life. In fact, there's another question I would ask you. When was the last time you made a significant change to follow Jesus in your life? When was the last time you made a significant change to better follow Jesus in your life? And you said, I can't watch this show. I can't spend time with this hobby. I can't fill in the blank. When was the last time you made a significant change to better follow Jesus? And if you can't answer that, maybe it's because you're doing so good. And props to you if you are and you're not me. But if I'm me, maybe it's because I've just been a little too selfish. That I've been more interested in making a donation to Jesus and not a total commitment. Let's put ourselves in the story. Jesus, we want to follow you. What would he say to us? Honestly. He didn't give any of them a pass and say, you're good, let's go. What would Jesus say to us? Hey, that's a really nice house you have there. It's probably bigger than you need, and you just like the extra space. Why don't you downsize it to something about half that size, and then you can use that money and invest it in the kingdom work, and there's some missionaries who could use it, your church could use it, and you could help the homeless situation. That would be great. How many are going to instantly do that? Or who's going to at least have to pause for a bit and think about it? Or what if you had 3 cars in the driveway and Jesus said, you really don't need 3. It's a matter of convenience. If you had 2, and yeah, you might have to spend a little more time commuting or shuffling, but you know what? You're not spending time on the gas and the wear and tear, and you're not spending money on the insurance, and you know what? You could really do a lot more kingdom work if you downsize those cars. And the number of restaurants that you're eating out at. If you ate some beans and rice, as Dave Ramsey says, you could really save some money, and that could really help the kingdom work. Or you spend a lot of time golfing now, and I know the golf course is fun and all, but that takes 4 hours, and then it takes a lot of money, and is that really the best way to spend your time? You've been binge watching these shows for a long time. Is that the best way to spend your time? And that smartphone, it's making you dumb because you're spending so much time on it. Maybe you need to do something else. Now, I give you all these scenarios. And most of the time we're like, well, Mark, don't be crazy. We need balance. We need balance. Jesus doesn't want me to give up all that stuff. Really? Did we not just read about these 3 guys? What did Jesus talk about with them? And then the Sunday after Easter, we're going to look at exactly the type of call Jesus has in some people's lives where he calls them to give up absolutely everything. See, we want a Jesus that we're comfortable with. We want a Jesus that's okay with materialism. We want a Jesus that's okay with our entertainment choices. We want a Jesus that's okay with how we spend our time and our money. We want a Jesus that does require some type of donation, but not a total commitment. And if that's the kind of Jesus we want, here's what you're going to end up worshiping. Yourself. We are turning Jesus into our image. No, we don't worship graven images like they might have back in the day of Moses and Aaron and the golden calf at the base of the mountain. But we are worshiping images of ourselves. Whenever we say, Jesus is okay with what I'm doing. Jesus is okay with how I'm living my life. Jesus is okay with my choices. He might be. But maybe he's calling us to something more, and we are deluding ourselves with a lie. Now look, I'm not judging you. Personally, and I don't say this to be mean, I don't care how you spend your time or money. Personally, you do what you want. But if you are here because you care about following Jesus, I'm telling you, you need to think about it. You need to truly consider it and ask, is Jesus calling me to do more? Pretty soon we're going to do that invitation song, and it's going to be, I have decided to follow Jesus, no turning back. Really? Can you sing those words and mean it? The world, behind me, the cross before me, can we really put Jesus only in front of us? Can we pick up our cross daily and follow him? I can't answer that for you. And if you came up to me after church and said, I absolutely am, Mark, I'm going to believe you because I have nothing to prove it against. I'm not trying to prove against it. I just need you to look at your life and make the best determination that you can. Am I following Jesus? Can I say it? And can I mean it? All right, so as the worship team joins me on stage, I want to quote for you Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Dietrich Bonhoeffer was one of the great Christian thinkers in the 1900s. He was born into a wealthy family. We talked about him in depth back in January, so don't need to rehash his whole life for you. But he was in Germany during World War II, and he saw the rise of the Nazis and what was going on in the persecution against the Jewish people, against the Christians, against all of them. And he had the opportunity to come to America to preach about what was going on, and he could do it freely. But he said, how can I leave these people to suffer and say, stay strong, when I'm not doing the same? And he refused. And so he stayed put, and it cost him his life. He spent a lot of time in prison, and he wrote several books. One of his most famous works is called The Cost of Discipleship. And the whole book is best summed up in one sentence. He said, when Christ calls a man, he bids him to come and die. When Christ calls a man, he bids him come and die. Jesus does not call you to show up and make a donation on Sunday mornings of time and money. He wants your whole life. And the reason he wants your whole life is he gave his whole life for you. For all the time he was on this earth, he gave of himself for everyone constantly, up to the point where he gave his life to pay the penalty of our sins so we don't have to. Christ is not asking us to do anything more than he did when he died on the cross. This morning, if you have not accepted the free gift of salvation, it's totally free. But then you commit yourself to following him the rest of your life, and it will cost you everything. But when you accept Jesus, it is totally worth it. This morning, if you need to accept him for the first time or need to renew that commitment, you meet me down front as we stand and as we sing.